Welcome back to the Cape Cop Cast, the official podcast of the Cape Coral Police Department. I'm a Public Affairs Officer, Lisa Greenberg.
And I'm Officer Mercedes Simonds, and together we make up the Public Affairs Office for the Cape Coral Police Department.
Yes, so today we have a really special guest on the Cape Cop Cast. We have Captain Brand Chenault. He's the captain of the Patrol Bureau. And I know as someone who's still pretty new to working for the police department, I found this interview extremely helpful in learning a lot about kind of the inner workings of the Patrol Bureau, and also it was nice just to learn a bit about him himself.
Yeah, he doesn't just have a great personality, but he's also one of the longest-standing police officers at the department. I think he said he's hired in '94, and so he's able to share kind of a lot of different wisdom and stories, and he was in the Marines. He just has a really cool history background, and he's just an overall really cool guy. And I know, in terms of being the patrol captain, he's very well respected amongst all of patrol. He's a really good leader that we have here.
I think it's interesting, too, because he kind of spoke to the evolution of the department and also talked about, how he kind of blends like an old school mentality with the new school to kind of create where we're at today.
Yeah, and I think that's why he's where he's at, is because he sees it from both sides. He sees things of like, this is what it means to be a police officer, and it always has, but this is how we've evolved, and here's why. And I think that's just one of the things that makes him really great.
Super interesting. So should we bring him in?
We should bring him in.
All right, let's do it.
Today we're here with Captain Brand Chenault. We were really looking forward to talking with him. We first introduced him in a video on social media where he's talking a little bit about his prior Marine experience and then how he became a cop from there. So I think we're really just excited to sit down with you, tell your story, and go from there.
Well, that's awesome. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how long you've been with the police department.
Well, we'll start off with law enforcement. I started working with the Cape Coral Police Department in 1994.
Awesome.
So this is my 30th year that I am in with the Cape Coral Police Department.
Are you the longest standing police officer we have at the department right now, or is there someone outside of you?
I am it. I am the longest tenured police officer with the city.
That's an accomplishment.
Right? So, okay, now we can say we have the, maybe not oldest,
No,
but
not oldest.
perhaps one of the most wise police officers sitting here with us to give us a little insight. I mean, you're one of the people that I go to if I have a question about, hey, we have this Throwback Thursday. Do you know any of the people in it? And usually you do. So that's a pretty good indicator.
I usually worked with all of them, so.
Yeah.
How cool.
All right. So, why don't we start with talking a little bit about your experience with the Marines?
Okay.
Go for it.
I'll go back over.
Yeah, so tell us about your Marine experience.
Yep. I actually joined the Marine Corps in 1989 when I graduated high school. I served for 8 years in the Marine Corps. I was an amphibious assault crewman. Basically, better lack of words, it's a tank that floats, comes out of the back of the ship because the Marine Corps is amphibious, for doing amphibious assault landings and stuff like that. Also, I served in the Gulf War. I spent like 2 years over there in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Saw a lot of action there.
Wow.
And then when I actually got out of full duty in the Marines in 1993, and I actually applied with the Cape Coral Police Department, went to the police academy, and was hired by Chief Ronald Gibbs in 1994.
I'm curious, what made you want to be a police officer after all of that experience?
Well, it was kind of different because nobody in my family had the same question because they all respected law enforcement, but most of my family, father, grandparents, uncles, they were all military. There's a Chenault that's been in pretty much every war that this country's ever been in when they went through like the family tree.
Wow.
So when I found out, I originally was like, well, I like the Marines. I like the structure. So I figured, I was going to get out and, I figured law enforcement was about a similar, not as strict maybe as like the military or the Marines are, but a little more structured, rank based. I kind of gravitated to that. And, I had a calling to go in the military, and I went in with my eyes open, knowing what the, potential consequences are of joining the military. So that's how I ended up applying, and I was lucky to be hired by the Cape Coral Police Department.
Why did you get out?
Well, that was a tough decision because originally I thought about really wanting to stay in, and but at the time, family stuff like that, it was just seemed like the right thing to do was to create another career path, and in the long term, now looking back, I'm glad I did.
Yeah. And I know not to say that you were a Marine. Once you're a
Oh, no.
Marine, always a
Oh,
Marine. So we're not ready to say
Yeah,
that.
there is no former Marine. And
Yeah.
obviously, you've seen in my last, when we did our last interview, my office is pretty full of Marine.
Yeah.
Even though it's been that long, you never forget. Because the one thing about Marines is that I could run into a Marine that I never met, maybe served in Korea or Vietnam, and we could start talking like we were best buddies because they all know they've all done similar things.
Right. Right. And I do have a question too. What led you to Cape Coral?
Well, actually, when we moved to Lee County, when I was going into high school, I actually went to Riverdale High School.
Nice.
So my father was a former Marine, and we moved here, to Lee County. And so I got to know a lot of the deputies and stuff because that was out, kind of rural Lee County. So when the natural place to come back was where my family was. I mean, my family's all pretty much in Florida. My parents eventually moved to, Punta Gorda, and then I have family in Gainesville. So this seemed like the right spot to come back to. I've always liked this area.
It's a great area.
Yes.
I'm a little biased. I'm from Southwest Florida too, so I get it.
I'm one of the rare people that were actually born in Florida.
Yeah.
And stay in Florida. I was born in Daytona Beach.
And your whole family is here too, if I can talk about them. They're
Yes.
great. Your son actually, did your son ever join the military at all? I know he's a cop.
Nope. He didn't. He did not join the military. None of my kids. And I kind of figured that was kind of my path. I never steered them away from it, but I made sure that, as they got old enough to kind of understand, like in high school, he wanted to go to school and then he wanted to be a police officer. So I gave him all the pros and cons. There's a lot of, especially when you have a family, there's a lot of holidays you miss, a lot of birthdays, a lot of anniversaries because you have to work. So I made sure that he knew going into it, there's a lot of benefits, but there's a lot of stuff that especially if you're starting a new family.
Yeah. I think that's the good part about law enforcement, though. Like, that was the draw to me because I think a lot of people in law enforcement have also considered joining the military in some fashion, but it's great because it's, we're kind of like a paramilitary organization. Yes. It's somewhat modeled after that. We're the local, almost like local military. We protect the community that we serve directly, but it's nice that you actually get to go home and see your family, even if you're working holidays. I think that's the big win for law enforcement versus the military. But how was your transition from the military to being a cop? Was that difficult?
Actually, it was a little tough because, you kind of think, because I didn't have any family members that were, in law enforcement to kind of lean on and go, what do you think or what's going to happen? So I kind of, as a 23-year-old, just out of the Marine Corps, starting with the Cape Coral Police Department, I kind of figured it was a lot similar to things that procedures and stuff like that in the Marines. And then when I got here, I realized, no, it's similar, but not the same. They're not, like you said, we are paramilitary. We do have like a rank structure. I mean, we have a chief, deputy chiefs, captains, lieutenants, sergeants, but it's a little bit different on how they train them and stuff like that. Because like in the Marine Corps, they train, if you're a sergeant, they teach you to do the lieutenant's job. They always teach you one rank higher because unfortunately, if you end up in combat and somebody goes down or gets injured, the person beneath them has to take their job. So you're always learning. But it was a little tough at first. I kind of, when I first, just to be honest, when I first started, I kind of went and talked to the recruiters a couple of times just to check on, maybe wanting to go back in the Marines, but I'm glad I didn't.
I mean, I'm sure that's something you miss. I think there's so much brotherhood in the military, especially when you're stuck in some random place outside the country where you're dealing with different things all day. And I know that you had a lot of not just military experience, you had a lot of combat experience.
Oh yes, definitely. And it's a whole different world when you're on the other side of people trying to do harm to you. It kind of brings a perspective to enjoying what you do have. I mean, I remember, being over there in the Gulf War, and one of the things that I missed the most and finally wrote home and my family sent it to me was a pillow.
My gosh.
You would not believe the things that you don't have when you're sleeping like in a tank, every night, and you're kind of rolling up something soft that you can find to put your head on, and you're like, it makes you appreciate the things that you don't have, the ability just to, I want to run to Chipotle to grab lunch. There's no Chipotle in the middle of the desert. You know what I mean? There's what am I getting, powdered eggs or or what? You know what I mean? Whatever they're bringing you, or you're eating, an MRE. So, just those kind of things like that people, I think, take for granted here because they've never had to live without it. I mean, to me, that's one of the benefits of being in this country,
Yeah. Where were some of the most special places that you went when you were in the military?
Well, obviously I went through Parris Island, which, everybody on this side of the Mississippi goes to. And then there's the other Marines that go to Hollywood, California, San Diego. But my home station was Camp Pendleton, California. Nice. I served time in, Okinawa. I've been to Guam, Sicily. Obviously Okinawa, we went to Japan as well. We did, several maneuvers there. And I ended up, obviously getting deployed, during when Saddam invaded in 1991, when he invaded Kuwait, I ended up in Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. And then a year later, we went back again. So in that short 4 years of active duty, we were kind of bouncing around a lot.
We talked a little bit about from military to police, but then when you come to a police department, you start at the bottom and you're a captain now. You've worked your way up through the ranks, and obviously that takes time and dedication, but how did that happen? Where are all the different places that you've been?
Okay. Let me just go into it.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, when I started, obviously we had a whole different kind of field training than they do now. They do a lot of pre-training now that we have before these guys actually hit the road. Basically, I was sworn in by the chief in the chief's office and told to show up at, Monday at 0600 hours. And that's when I started my first day. Your first day of FTO was in FTO out on the road with your training officer. So it was a big culture shock because, obviously, you have to make a lot of decisions, and, you're like I tell my young officers, you're a police officer now. You have the authority to take someone's civil liberties and lock them up, and you got to make sure you know what you're doing. So that was a big transition, coming from the military where I kind of knew life and how things were handling, to law enforcement where, you have a book, 7 inches thick full of statutes and laws and ordinances, and, and trying not to mess something up, or being a new officer, having the sergeant or lieutenant yell at you because, you messed something up and did something that you weren't supposed to. So, originally the first, couple years on patrol was a little tough, because you're trying, you kind of know what you're doing, but you don't really know what you're doing yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I talked to my dad. My dad was a cop probably when you started in Terre Haute, Indiana.
I appreciate that. Makes me feel a whole lot younger.
But it's interesting kind of hearing the same story from him as to how training has evolved, because he kind of has the same story as you, is starting, hey, I didn't even really go to the academy. Before I went to the academy, I was already on patrol in field training, and they had on-the-job training. But it's just really interesting the way that things have changed from being able to take people's civil liberties away without even having much training to we would never do that now because of liability.
It actually changed a lot because, like, when I went to the police academy, my class was actually the first class that actually took the state exam. Prior to actually having a certified state exam, when you went to the class before me, they went to the police academy, and if you graduated with, your grades, you were certified. Mm-hmm. So that was, being the first class to go to the police academy, and, they really didn't know. I always tell everybody they overtaught, because the easiest test we ever took in the police academy was the state exam. We were all done in like 30 minutes, like, okay, we're good. But that was all transitioning changes. I mean, everything's changing in law enforcement. And I think in today's world, going through my career, especially in the last few years, there's been a lot of changes. And then I think the changes come faster, because when I started, obviously there was a lot of, I'm kind of an old timer now, but there was a lot of old timers, and, they kind of It wasn't a big transition from how they policed in 68 when they started to 1994. There wasn't a lot of changes other than the body styles of the patrol cars.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of changes come just because we've made mistakes. That's how all changes in law enforcement have been made throughout the years. Some mistakes are huge, some are minor, but I think we've evolved to kind of have things where we have them today. And I think a lot of the changes have been really good. You were probably lost when you were just like put on the streets with no training, and you
were pretty much.
That's how you learn.
Yeah, you kind of learned a lot. I mean, you're my FTOs, I had good FTOs, so they taught me a lot, but they basically, they're teaching you to be a basic police officer. They're not teaching you to be Chuck Norris when your first day on the road. You know the basic ins and outs, and they're comfortable. When I did field training, before I let somebody go, I wanted to be comfortable that when they're on their own, that they're able to back me up. Or if I need assistance, or I'm not worrying about them not knowing how to write a report right and stuff like that.
What's your best words of wisdom to a new rookie on the street today?
I would listen and learn to the people that have been here. That's where you're going to get a lot of your best stuff. I mean, you can read books, you can read stuff, but until you actually, had the actual experience to be on calls, because when you go to training and you hear when the watch commanders are reviewing a major call for service, the biggest, pay attention and learn. Put yourself in that position, because, it's the old thing, like in the Marine Corps and even through training here. If you haven't put it through your mind through a scenario, constantly thinking about, well, if this happens, what do I do? Well, if this happens, what do I do? Because I remember driving around with my FTOs, and they were like, okay, we're going to this disturbance. What are you going to do if, God forbid, somebody comes out with a gun?
Right.
Or what are you going to do if somebody's standing in the driveway threatening somebody with a knife? So you have to like go there in your mind before it happens, because then if it happens and you haven't at least thought about something, you're kind of like, all right, now what do I do? And that's the worst thing that can happen being a police officer, is you have to be able to make decisions in realistically, sometimes in a split second. Everybody's seen videos, the officers pulling over a guy for rolling through a stop sign, and the next thing you know, they come to find out that this guy's a sovereign citizen and he jumps out with a rifle. You better be able to act quick,
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And so you got your experience as an officer. From there, where did you go? I
did about 6.5 years on patrol between days and nights, and then back to days again. But I always try to tell people, try to find your niche. But as a supervisor, I always tell guys, get a little time in, get seasoned, see what you like to do. Some people, they like to do traffic. Some people like to do an investigation. Some people like to, go around and shake hands and kiss babies, But I mean, you got to find what you enjoy doing. And during patrol, I really found out that I enjoyed doing traffic enforcement. And then there was some openings coming up in the motor unit. So I talked to my sergeants and lieutenants at the time, and they did the things to help me get what I needed to. And, I was able to put in for an opening for the motor unit. And, after completing probably one of the toughest courses that I've ever done in my history of the police department is, getting certified to be a motor officer. Then I was a Cape Coral Police motor officer for a number of years.
Yeah, we have a lot of pictures. If for those who are viewing instead of listening, we'll post some pictures in, because that's what we were saying. We have a lot of other people that it's like I'm new. I have no idea who people are, but I know you have a million good stories from all the different motors guys that you worked with, your bikes have changed over the years. You had Harley to BMW back to Harley, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. When I first got hired, they were, anybody that can remember the old Chips TV show, they were on the same, the Kawasaki 1000s, and then they went to Harleys, and then, we switched to the BMW, and I came back as a motor sergeant, and, being a Harley police officer rider, we switched back to Harley Davidson's, which the current officers are on now.
I think you talked about it once, just the addition of the pipe that you guys had that was custom made and awesome.
You talking about the actual exhaust on the?
I think so. I think you had some Harley modification,
When
or
I was
maybe it
on?
was a BMW. I don't know. I can't remember.
When I was on, or like the new ones?
When you were on, I think you were the one that had it
We-
suggested to have that additional exhaust built because it made it louder.
yeah.
Everybody was more visible.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because obviously, anything that comes from the factory, it doesn't really have that sound. And at that time, we were going to Harleys, and the majors and the chief at the time, where we kind of talked them into aftermarket slip-on pipes to make it a little more throaty. Because we're like, I want people to hear me at that point. You're only on a motorcycle. You got 2 wheels and a helmet, and pretty cool boots that you get to wear. But
The boots are pretty cool.
so we were always like, let's get a little more rumble. So if we're weaving in and out of traffic, people can hear us coming. Because everybody doesn't automatically look for a motorcycle; they look
Right.
for a police car. Even though we had like 9,000 lights on these things, red and blue lights. So, and then the funny part was when the major actually at the time agreed that we could do these pipes, we didn't tell them that they were stamped, off-road use only. So, but luckily it was on the inside
Yeah.
of the saddlebags. There's a big difference when you can hear them. And, obviously, I helped work on, redesigning and building the current model that they're in now. And they all have all the same features, except for their pipes don't say off-road use only.
They're still really cool.
They're pretty cool.
But okay, so you went from patrol sergeant to motor sergeant. You still wear your motor's wings, right? On your Class A?
Actually, on my Class A and on my regular. Obviously, I'm not on my Polo, but I wear that every day because, people don't realize, the requirements to be a motor officer and what you do every day. And, chasing down people that are speeding. And, it's less than 1% of police officers in the United States are motor officers. You're a rarity in law enforcement. Not a lot of people want to jump on a Harley Davidson and, somebody drive by at 110 miles an hour and go chase them down through traffic.
Okay, so essentially once a Marine, always a Marine, but once a motors officer, always a
Pretty
motors
much.
officer.
Yeah, because, just not to be biased, but, Marines they're pretty elite because it is a smaller branch of the military. And, being a motor officer, when I found out, that, 1% of all police officers in the United States are motor officers, I kind of always grafted to trying to be one of the few and the proud.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so from being a motors officer, what was kind of your next career step?
Well, obviously I went into I did leave the motors full time and was doing full time commercial vehicle enforcement. And then, always as sergeant tests come up, I ended up, taking a few sergeant's boards, and I was lucky enough to get promoted. I got promoted after 15 years, which was kind of nice because I got to do a lot of things. I got to, patrol, motors, commercial vehicle enforcement. So I got to do the things that I wanted to do. So I think that made it even better coming back as a sergeant because obviously back then, when you got promoted, you came back to patrol as, was your initial. And obviously being out of patrol for a while, coming back was a little bit, well, you're used to like just doing traffic enforcement. Right. Now you got, now you're the sergeant of these officers and they're asking you all these other kinds of questions. And you're like, I can tell you what the statute is for unlawful speed. So
Right.
it was a big switch, but, I enjoyed that obviously, and, as a sergeant, one of my first watch commanders is now he was a lieutenant at the time. He's now the current chief of police of the Cape Coral Police Department. And I used to joke with him on shift, and I used to always tell him, "Now you're going back." He was a lieutenant, I was a sergeant, and I used to always joke with him on shift, going, "You're going to be the last chief that I work for." And lo and behold, he is going to be the last chief that I work for.
Wow.
Which was kind of like a joke back then, but it ended up coming to fruition.
That's really cool. Have you talked to him about that?
Oh yeah, he knows that. Trust me.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's
he knows
really
that.
cool.
So, you get to see a lot of people, and obviously being now, it's kind of weird to say you're the longest tenured police officer.
Right.
Because I'm in my 30th year right now. So, I've seen a lot of people come and a lot of people go and a lot of people retire, and it's nice to see, guys that have come after me that, did the right things and moved through the ranks, and and now I work for them,
That's awesome.
which is pretty cool.
So what's it like being captain now of patrol, which in my opinion, and I got to work under you a little bit when you were a captain in patrol and a lieutenant in patrol, you have the respect of everyone that works for you because you take care of your people. I think you bring that old school mentality with the new school ideas and really put that together.
Yeah, I try to always, and even when I was a sergeant and a lieutenant, I was a watch commander on night shift for a while, which I loved. People think I was crazy, because I liked being a nighttime watch commander, That's where the stuff happens on the road. When I started, not to belittle anybody, but the old timers would be cops work at night, police officers work in the daytime. And what they meant is, if you're working at night, you're out, most people, the good people are sleeping.
Yeah.
You're out looking for stuff that's happening. People that are, in the daytime, they're doing that too. Like you said, a little old school, everybody here knows me, and that's kind of like my motto, a little old school, to the point where when Chief Sizemore promoted me to captain, one of the conversations we had, and I'm gonna tell on them a little bit, but one of the conversations we had is, we want you to, bring a little old school back to patrol.
Yeah.
Realize that the patrol bureau commander has their guys back.
Right.
I know what they're going through every day. I know when they get called in for overtime and have to work, because I've had to do that. I never forgot those things, and being at home with your family, and because a couple people had to call off sick, and you were the new guy, and your phone rings, and you're like, "Hey, sorry to do this, but we're short staffed on the road, and we need you to come to work." So I understand those.
Yeah.
When I'm asking somebody to do that, I understand what they're going through, and going through the conversation when I got promoted to captain, he's like, we want you to bring a little old school back to patrol. And I remember looking at him and making a funny face, and his next comment was, "We know all about Brand Chenault." So,
But that's so cool though. I mean, especially coming from Maryland to be a police officer in Florida, it's a great place to be a police officer and actually get to do your job. But especially for you being the captain for new officers, I know I've heard it from you, I've heard it from them, that you actually encourage them to learn, go out there, make mistakes. Don't be, obviously use your training experience, all that, but don't be afraid to screw something up, because all you're going to do is learn. You're going to get better. Everybody makes mistakes, even police officers. And I think just knowing that they have someone that has their back makes all the difference, because they're not afraid to go out there and hunt for drugs or make good arrests. And I think that it's really just going to build the future of the police department to be what we need it to be, because we need the real police here.
Yeah, that's what you need. I don't need, I don't need someone to drive around in a marked police car for their entire shift and not look to do anything, not interact with people. Some people, it's hard for them to interact verbally with people now because of the way we live in society now. We live in a texting world, a social media world. But to actually look somebody in the eyes and tell them, just quit. I'm telling you to stop. Stuff like that. It's a whole different thing than when I got into law enforcement. There was no cell phones.
Not even just the conversation in general, but having to have the difficult conversations, right? Like those aren't easy conversations to have in general. You're having to sometimes be, for lack of a better word, confrontational.
Yes, because we always joke that nobody ever calls the police department to come over and have Sunday fried chicken dinner. Usually, when somebody calls 911 or they call, they're in crisis.
Right.
So we respond to what people don't want to respond to. We don't want to have to go to people's houses and all the time and hear that somebody battered their spouse or somebody hurt their kid or somebody was in a bad accident and now they're injured. But that's what we do every day.
Right. That's just the reality of the job, and it's not going anywhere. I don't think it doesn't do anyone any good to try to tie our hands behind our back. And I think the training we receive is really good, but it's also important to know not just the law, but what all you can do. And
I look at it like, I've been lucky I have a good, you got to have something outside of law enforcement too. I'm very thankful I have a good family. I mean, my family.
Your family's great.
I have a supportive wife who I love, and she loves me. And my kids are now, the youngest is now older than you probably, but
you have a grandkid, not to throw you under the bus, not to make you feel old.
Yeah, I know, and she's a handful. She's 3 already. But she's just like her noni. She gets a lot of time, and I have two sons and a daughter, and
right.
They all support what I do, and they worry, but I don't give them reasons to worry because, I kind of like how when I first got into law enforcement, it was a different kind of thinking, from, I used to call them the old timers, they, you didn't wear your emotions on your sleeve. You did your job and then you went home, and a lot of people I think did, turned to other things that weren't helpful for them.
Right.
So I like now that officers go to a bad incident or a death call or something serious. They talk about it now. They don't have to take it home.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody doesn't, they're young, they may not have a good family base at home yet. They're just young. If you're 22, now a lot of people 22 get married, so they don't have this, that someone at home they can talk to and, feel better. But we do have law enforcement transitioning and changing. We understand that these guys and gals see things that aren't what normal people see.
Right.
And we try to make sure that, we get them the help if they need to go talk to somebody or stuff like that. Instead of just, hey, tough it up.
Yeah, that's important.
So, I mean, I think that's, we look at the whole person now, not just the cop.
Yeah. I mean, I brought up before that my dad was a cop, and back in the day, he told me when they went through kind of what we view, society would view as something traumatic, they just brush it off or joke about it. They never really got to talk about it. And I think that's probably one of the better things that we've done over time is really say, hey, stop, let's talk about it, do a deep dive. What happened? Maybe we could have done something better, but overall, it's recognizing that stuff actually has an impact on people and hopefully addressing it.
I don't want, any of my police officers that work for me, and especially in patrol, because they see a lot, I don't want them to have issues outside of work because of a traumatic call they went on or something like that, which is a big culture change from when I started. And, because a lot of times I have to realize that these are good things. Right. Sometimes when I hear, somebody's, having a hard time, or one of my lieutenants say, yeah, they went to this type of call and, kind of bothered them, and stuff like that. And I go, I understand that. Let's send them home. Let's let them, I'd rather him go home, relax, or her for the rest of the day, come back in, clear head, ready to go to work.
Yeah.
Instead of being out there worrying about something, and you need to be worrying about what you're doing when you're a police officer, not something else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Because you're responsible for yourself, your buddies, and the community that you serve.
Okay. So for anyone who's listening who may not know, what exactly is it like a day in the life of a patrol officer?
Well, just to explain, to keep it kind of simple, we have 2 day shifts and 2 patrol shifts, that are all supervised by a lieutenant and their respective sergeants. Our shifts are split in 2 times. The first part of each shift, on day shift, they come in at 6 o'clock in the morning. The second half comes in at 7, and vice versa. They got to come in, and one of the big changes since I've been in law enforcement is the use of a body camera. So they come in and get their equipment, their body cameras, get ready for the day, and they have a roll call. Basically, in the roll call is all those officers that are working at that respective time. They sit down, and the sergeants and the lieutenants on the shifts go over any information or something that came down through the chain of command that they need to go over for training or stuff like that. And it's kind of a good time for everybody to kind of get their game face on. I always looked at it like, I played football, so you looked at it like right before you hit the game, the coach come in and kind of talk to you and get you all revved up, ready to go. And, let's go out there and hit it and be safe, like they watch the TV shows, And then obviously those officers are each assigned a specific zone of the district or the area that they work in the city. And while they're not responding to a call for service, at that time, they are actively looking for people that are violating traffic laws. You're checking nighttime, they're checking closed businesses to make sure that nobody's hanging out in the alley trying to break in. You're doing police work when you're not dedicated time. And, obviously in that time, they're working on their plethora of reports that they have to do. That's another big change I saw. There's a lot of reports that we do and a lot of stuff that's added to reports that we do for information that maybe it wasn't tracked before, but now it's tracked, because we need to know these things. And then, they work a 12-hour shift. So they try to transition towards the closing time, and then hopefully they get to go home on time. But if not, if they're stuck, then, they get stuck working overtime. You can't, if you made an arrest at 5:30, you can't go, all right,
see ya.
At 6 o'clock, I'm out. You have to go through you have to finish the whole thing. But that's pretty much normal day, night, and you're always responding to different things. Mm-hmm. That's the one thing that I did getting into law enforcement. I kind of realized that just talking to some people that I knew that, had gotten into law enforcement, not family, but like friends that I knew, it's never the same thing. You might get the same, you're responding to a disturbance call. Well, every disturbance call is called a disturbance call, but every one is different people, different things. It's not monotonous.
Right.
No.
It's always different. It's always different. And that's what's always kind of attracted me to this day. Still, the law enforcement. Even when I was a lieutenant, I used to like to roll on calls a lot because, just to kind of keep in the game. But
it's always interesting.
It's always interesting, and the things we find interesting. We have, you're a police officer. We have weird senses of humor, so.
Yeah, we definitely do. I think, and I think that's kind of one of the interesting things is going from military to police work. Is with the military, you always knew that people were kind of out to get you. You always knew exactly who your enemy was, even if you didn't know where they were, what they had. But then switching over to law enforcement, it's like you never know how things, who's against you, who's for you, who has a gun, who doesn't. Who has a gun that wants to use it against you is really what we look at down here.
Oh yeah, we live in the South. My grandma, she's always had a gun, always been able to shoot till she was 90 years old.
Your grandma?
Oh yeah,
so, that's amazing.
And she was actually a World War II veteran. Her and my grandpa met serving in Burma underneath Patton. General Patton. So it goes back to my family history of everybody serving in the military.
Right.
Yeah, she was a nurse in the Army during World War II.
You don't find very many women that served in the military back then. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That is awesome.
Oh yeah, she was a tough. She's about the same height as my wife. Believe it or not.
How tall is that?
5. I'm not gonna say
not
5,
very tall.
Teeny.
5 feet and a half inch.
That's
maybe.
awesome.
Her license may say 5'1", but probably 5 feet.
That's awesome.
We realize that we live in the South, and we do. There's a lot of people that carry firearms.
Yeah.
But you never know. I treated every car, and I try to teach every officer that's ever worked for me. You treat everybody you come in contact with like they're armed until you know they're not. I don't trust you till I've verified. You know what I mean? So
right.
if you go into that situation that when I'm making this traffic stop for somebody just rolling a stop sign, that I'm going to treat them like the vehicle is armed. Not that we change who we do, but be aware of what's going on. Be aware of the clues and body actions and demeanor and all that stuff. You have to always be aware. I'm going to tell on myself, because it does happen. We all kind of get tunnel vision and stuff like that. But I remember one traffic stop that I did as a motor officer, because we were, our role was try to catch people violating the law and move on to the next. We didn't want to spend a lot of time if we didn't have to. It was kind of a business transaction, and we went around and looked for somebody else. I pulled the car over. I was all, kind of excited. They were doing like 92 miles an hour on Pine Island Road, and believe it or not, it was in a convertible Corvette. So I walk up to the guy, introduce myself, and the convertible top's down, so you can see all in there. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of holding on to a steering wheel, and I get his all information. I go back and working on my citation, and I walk back up, and he's still got his hands in the same spot that it was when I pulled him over.
Tells you a lot.
And I go, "Why are your hands still holding on the steering wheel?" He goes, "Man, I'm not moving. I have a." He has a concealed weapons permit, and he had a firearm in his vehicle. He had a firearm. He's like, "I wasn't moving, but it was visible, but I didn't see it because I was more worried about, I got this guy speeding, and I'm going to write this ticket, And I always use that excuse, that explanation when I'm talking to younger officers and stuff like that. You can't. Just because you get excited because, maybe it's a good stop or you pull the guy over and you smell drugs coming out of the car, don't forget everything else that you're supposed to look for.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
That was one of the biggest transitions coming from being a cop in Maryland to being a cop in Florida. Is in Maryland, really nobody had a gun unless they could have a gun. Like law enforcement could always carry. It wasn't, but they don't even just give out concealed carry to just anybody. And then we come down here and Joe Schmo can have a gun. I came across a traffic stop and this guy had an extended mag in his glove box and he was just acting really weird. And it's like, you can run the gun, you can make sure it's not stolen, but outside that, it's strange feeling that they're allowed to have it, even though something's wrong. Yeah. And most people down here who have guns, hopefully they're trained, they know how to use them, and most people are good about them. I love the people on traffic stops who say, "Hey, just letting you know, I have a concealed carry. I'm carrying it's here." Yeah. That is the greatest thing. And obviously you don't let your guard down still, but it's just nice when people let you know,
it's just nice to always
"Hey,
know that.
I'm being transparent with you so that you feel safe too."
Because those are the people that, should have guns. They're the people that are respectful to law enforcement when they have an interaction and they say, "Sir, ma'am, just to let you know, I do have a concealed weapons permit and I do have a firearm in the vehicle." And then, where is the firearm? Okay, as long as you don't go reaching anywhere for your, we'll be good. Because they're legally allowed to carry a firearm in their vehicle if they're legal. You know what I mean? So,
very different.
Different world.
Definitely. Captain Chenault, is there anything else that you want to talk about while we have you here on the Cape Cop Cast?
I don't know. Other than, I'm pretty proud that I was able to do this.
We're proud to have you.
Yeah.
One of our first guests. Yeah. We love it.
Hopefully everybody out there likes it and
they will.
Hits the like button. I have a reputation to upkeep now in the police department with numbers of likes, right?
In case for those who didn't know, the video we mentioned at the beginning was kind of like one of the record-breaking videos for us. And, that's when we were first starting out. In Cape Coral, we wear red on Fridays. Yeah. We love hiring prior military, people with all kinds of experience, because I think that brings a lot to the table. It's kind of already having tactics and a lot of different room clearing dynamics and just the overall, especially being a Marine.
And we have an Iwo Jima statute coming on veterans right there.
Yeah.
So it's kind of nice seeing that when I give it a little salute every time I drive by, when coming and going, because that's a sign of the Marine Corps right there.
Yep.
Yeah, but no, we're really lucky to have you here. I think it's going to be a big loss one day when you retire. Hopefully it's not too soon.
Not too soon.
But no, we love having you. Thanks for being our guest and sharing a little bit more of your story. And I'm sure everybody is really going to enjoy it too.
I hope so.
I completely agree. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We had so much fun having you. And we'll see you next time, Captain Chenault.
All right, cool.
Thank you for listening to the Cape Cop Cast, where we dive into the heart of the Cape Coral Police Department safety initiatives, community relations, and the insightful stories of different officers that make up our department.
Please like and share our podcast. If you have feedback, you can email capepdpao@capecoral.gov. And remember to follow us on social media. Our handle is @CapePD on all major platforms. Stay safe, stay Cape.